My name is Emma Caldwell. I was 18 years old when my own parents handed me a trash bag, told me I wasn't family anymore, and locked the front door behind me. 15 years later, they answered a knock at that exact same door. Only this time, I wasn't asking to come inside. I was there to tell them they had 30 days to leave. Before I tell you how my own family managed to lose everything to the daughter they threw away, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories where patience beats cruelty and karma doesn't rush, but it never forgets. Now, here's what happened. I was 18 years old when I learned that being someone's child didn't necessarily mean they loved you. People always assume families fall apart after years of screaming. Mine didn't. Mine died quietly, like mold growing behind wallpaper. By the time anyone notices it, the damage has already spread through the whole house. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. From the outside, my family looked normal. Dad worked construction. Mom worked at the local bank. We had a neat little white house with blue shutters, trimmed hedges, and flower beds my mother cared about far more than she cared about me. People used words like respectable. They never saw what happened after the front door closed. My older brother Jason was the golden child. If Jason got a B, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got an A, it was because girls have it easier. If Jason forgot to take out the trash, everyone laughed. If I forgot, dinner disappeared. Literally. Mom believed consequences built character. Funny how consequences only ever built mine, not Jason's. By 14, I was cooking dinner 4 nights a week, doing laundry, cleaning bathrooms, helping my brother with homework even though he was older than me. Dad used to call me the useful one. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Years later, I realized he never called me the loved one, only useful. Useful people get replaced. Loved people get protected. I didn't understand the difference until much later. My dream was simple. College. Nothing fancy. I wanted to study business. Not because I loved spreadsheets, because I wanted money. Not expensive cars, not designer handbags. Freedom. Growing up poor teaches you something rich people rarely understand. Money isn't happiness. Money is options. And options are freedom. Every scholarship application became another tiny escape route. I studied until 2 in the morning, worked weekends at a grocery store, saved every dollar, hidden inside an old cookie tin beneath loose floorboards in my bedroom. I knew better than to keep money in the bank. Mom believed children's earnings belonged to the family, which was a nice way of saying she stole from me. If I earned $200, she'd ask for help with bills. If I said no, suddenly I wasn't allowed to leave the house. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I just hid everything. When I turned 17, Jason crashed Dad's truck, drunk. He wrapped it around a telephone pole. Miraculously, nobody died. Dad spent months paying off repairs. Mom cried about how hard life was. Not once did anyone suggest Jason should help. Instead, guess whose college savings disappeared? Mine. Mom found the cookie tin while cleaning. She stood in my bedroom holding almost $4,000. I still remember the exact way sunlight hit the bills through the window. Like every hour I'd worked was glowing one last time. She smiled. "Oh, Emma, you've been hiding money from your family?" I couldn't even breathe. "That's mine." She laughed. "No. It belongs to this household." I looked at Dad, waiting, begging, anything. He didn't even look up from the television. "We need it more than you do." That sentence echoed inside my head for years. We need it more than you do. Jason destroyed the truck. I paid. I almost left then. Almost. But where would I go? I still believed. If I just kept trying. Maybe they'd finally see me. That's the cruelest trap neglect creates. hope. 3 months after graduation, I received an acceptance letter. A partial scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but enough. I cried holding that envelope. Not because I was happy, because someone, somewhere, believed I was worth investing in. I ran into the kitchen. I got in. Mom didn't even smile. Who's paying? I'll work. I'll take loans. I'll figure it out. Dad folded his newspaper. No. I blinked. What? No college. My stomach tightened. I earned this. Dad shrugged. We're not wasting money so you can pretend you're better than your family. I'm not asking you to pay. It doesn't matter. Mom crossed her arms. Girls don't need degrees. They need stability. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Jason had failed out of community college twice. Dad had paid every cent. I had scholarships. Savings. Before they took them. A job. Plans. And somehow, I was the irresponsible one. That argument lasted 4 hours. Voices rose. Doors slammed. Every dream I'd ever built collapsed sentence by sentence. Finally, Dad stood. If you walk out that door for college, don't come back. Silence. Heavy. Unmoving. I looked at him. Then Mom. Waiting for someone to soften. Nobody did. I whispered, So you're choosing this? Dad answered immediately. No. You're choosing strangers over family. I wish I could say I made some inspiring speech. I didn't. I cried. Ugly crying. The kind where breathing hurts. I begged. Actually begged. For my own parents to care whether I stayed. They didn't. Dad disappeared into the garage. Mom went upstairs. I sat alone in the kitchen until midnight. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, summer crickets sang like nothing in the world had changed. Inside, everything had. The next morning, I found a black trash bag outside my bedroom. My clothes. Thrown inside. No suitcase. No boxes. Just garbage bags. Mom looked at me while drinking coffee. You've got until noon. I stared. What? You heard me. Dad never looked up. Jason smirked. Actually smirked. You wanted independence? Congratulations. My hands started shaking so hard I couldn't tie the trash bag shut. I kept waiting. For someone to say they were kidding. Nobody did. At exactly 11:57 a.m., I stood on the front porch with one backpack, one trash bag full of clothes, and $23 in my wallet. Dad opened the door. You made your choice. Then, he handed me my house key. Not to keep. To return. I placed it in his palm. He closed his fingers around it and shut the door. Click. The deadbolt turned. That tiny metallic sound, it echoed louder than any scream ever could. Because that sound meant something permanent. I wasn't grounded. I wasn't punished. I wasn't coming back tomorrow. I had been erased. I stood on that porch for almost 10 minutes. Not crying, not moving, just staring at the blue paint on the front door. The same door Mom had measured our heights against every birthday. The same door Dad had carried me through after I broke my arm when I was 7. Funny how a door can hold both your happiest memories and your worst one. Eventually, my neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, came outside to water her roses. She looked at the trash bag, then at me, then at the closed front door. She understood immediately. Without asking a single question, she walked across the lawn. Come inside. I finally broke. I buried my face into the shoulder of a woman who wasn't related to me, because the people who were had decided I was disposable. I thought surviving that day would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. I had no idea. The real struggle was only beginning, and before the end of that first week, I would discover just how expensive freedom could really be. Mrs. Donnelly let me stay for 3 nights. She never asked me what I'd done. That was the first thing that made me cry. not the kindness itself, the trust. She simply looked at an 18-year-old girl carrying her life in a trash bag and decided there had to be a reason she looked so hollow. Every morning she'd make coffee, slide a plate of toast toward me, and talk about ordinary things: the weather, her roses, a television show she'd watched the night before. She was giving me something I hadn't realized I'd lost: normal. She understood that if she treated me like a tragedy, I'd never stop feeling like one. On the fourth morning, she sat across from me with a yellow legal pad. "Emma," I looked up. "You need a plan. Not sympathy, not pity. A plan." Those 3 words became the foundation of the rest of my life. The scholarship covered tuition. Barely. It didn't cover housing, books, food, transportation, or the 1,000 little expenses nobody warns you about until you're already drowning. The university had 1 room left in student housing. It was a converted storage room in the oldest dormitory on campus. No air conditioning. 1 narrow window that overlooked a brick wall. A mattress so thin I could feel the wooden slats underneath. When the housing coordinator apologized for how small it was, I smiled. "It's perfect." She looked confused. Later I realized she'd never met someone who'd just become grateful for 4 walls and a lock that belonged to them. I worked every job I could find. Mornings at a campus cafe, evenings shelving books at the library, weekends cleaning offices downtown. There were weeks I averaged 4 hours of sleep a night. I'd wake up with my jaw aching because I'd been grinding my teeth. My fingers cracked from bleach. The smell of industrial cleaning chemicals settled into my clothes so deeply that no amount of washing seemed to remove it. Some nights I'd sit on the edge of that tiny bed with instant noodles balanced on my knees. I'd calculate every dollar in my bank account: rent, electricity, laundry, textbooks. If I bought fresh fruit this week, could I still afford the bus pass? If I skipped lunch 3 days in a row, maybe I could replace my worn-out sneakers next month. Every decision had consequences. Not dramatic movie consequences. Quiet ones. The kind that slowly shape a life. People love stories about making it. They rarely tell you about the loneliness. Nobody talks about eating dinner alone in the library because it stayed open later than your dorm. Nobody talks about pretending you aren't cold because your heating bill is already overdue. Nobody talks about watching classmates complain that their parents forgot to send spending money while you're wondering if 53 cents is enough to buy breakfast. I learned to smile. It was easier. People are uncomfortable around desperation. Around Thanksgiving, campus emptied out. Suitcases rolled across sidewalks. Cars filled with laughing families lined up outside the dorms. My roommate had gone home 2 days earlier. The hallways echoed. I stayed behind. I told people I wanted to catch up on studying. The truth? I didn't have anywhere to go. I remember standing by the window that evening, watching snow begin to fall. Soft, quiet, beautiful. The first snow of the year. I realized it was the first holiday I'd ever spent completely alone. I called my parents anyway. I don't know why. "Hope is stubborn," Dad answered. For 1 second, I felt relieved. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe. "Hello? Dad? It's Emma." Silence. Then a sigh. "What do you want?" I swallowed hard. "I wanted to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving." More silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You made it clear you don't have a family anymore." Click. That was it. No yelling. No insults. Just absence. I sat on the floor with my phone still against my ear long after the call had ended. Sometimes cruelty isn't loud. Sometimes it's delivered in the calmest voice imaginable. I stopped calling after that. Not because I stopped caring, because I finally understood they had already made their decision. The only person refusing to accept it was me. By my second year, exhaustion had become normal. I could fall asleep sitting upright. I carried coffee everywhere. I developed migraines from stress. One afternoon, while shelving books at the library, everything went blurry. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in the campus health center. The nurse frowned at me. "When was the last time you ate?" "I had breakfast." "What time?" I looked at the clock. It was almost 6 in the evening. "Oh." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she quietly handed me a granola bar. I burst into tears. Not because of the food, because someone had noticed. A week later, Professor Helen Brooks asked me to stay after class. She taught introductory business management. Strict, precise. The kind of professor students feared. I assumed I'd done something wrong. Instead, she closed the classroom door and folded her hands. "Emma?" "Yes?" "I've been teaching for 23 years. I nodded. "I know the difference between a lazy student and an exhausted one." I froze. "You've been falling asleep in lectures." "I'm sorry." "You never submit late work." "I know." "You answer every question correctly." "I try." "You look like you're carrying the world." I stared at the floor. Then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I told her everything, not all at once. The words came slowly, like pulling splinters. The trash bag, the scholarship, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours, being thrown out. When I finished, the room was silent. Professor Brooks took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Then she said something that changed my life. "You remind me of myself." I looked up. "My father told me women belonged in kitchens." She smiled faintly. "I bought the building he retired from." For the first time in months, I laughed. She became my mentor. Not by handing me money. She refused. Instead, she handed me opportunities, internships, networking events, books, advice. She taught me something my parents never had: how to think beyond surviving. One afternoon, she drew 2 circles on a sheet of paper. The first circle was tiny. She wrote, "Today." The second circle surrounded it. She labeled it 10 years. "If all you think about is today's bills, you'll always be broke." She tapped the larger circle. "Build a life your future self will thank you for." I carried that piece of paper in my wallet for over a decade. By 24, I had graduated near the top of my class. No one from my family came. Not that I expected them to. Mrs. Donnelly did. She drove 3 hours wearing a bright blue dress and cried louder than anyone else when my name was called. After the ceremony, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm proud of you." 3 simple words. I realized then I had spent my childhood chasing those words from people who had no intention of ever saying them. And yet, hearing them from someone who chose to love me somehow meant even more. I landed an entry-level position at a commercial real estate firm. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady. For the first time in my life, my bank account slowly started growing instead of shrinking. I rented a tiny apartment, bought secondhand furniture, opened a retirement account because Professor Brooks insisted. I even bought real groceries without calculating every apple. Little victories, the kind nobody applauds, but they're the ones that change your life. Then, almost 7 years after I'd been thrown out, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice. Older. Sharper. "Emma?" My chest tightened. Mom. I hadn't heard her voice in years. Not once. Not a birthday. Not Christmas. Nothing. Now suddenly, she wanted something. I knew it before she even spoke. Parents who abandon their children rarely call because they miss them. They call because they need them. "Your father isn't working much." She paused. "We've fallen behind." I waited. "The bank might foreclose." There it was. Not, "How have you been?" Not, "I'm sorry." Straight to money. She cleared her throat. We were wondering if you could help. The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed. The same people who had taken my savings were asking for mine. I closed my eyes. Every memory rushed back. The trash bag, the locked door, the empty holidays, the hunger, the nights crying into a pillow so nobody would hear. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked one quiet question. Mom, when you threw me out, did you ever think about where I'd sleep? Silence. A long one. Finally, she answered. We did what we thought was best. No apology. Not even after all those years. Just justification. I thanked her for calling. Then I hung up. My hands were trembling. Not with guilt, with clarity. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe them a single thing, but fate wasn't finished weaving our lives together, because 6 years later, while reviewing a routine list of distressed properties at work, one familiar address would make my heart stop. It was the address I'd spent 18 years trying to forget. My childhood home was officially headed for auction, and for the first time since that door had been slammed in my face, I held all the power. For a long time, I believed revenge looked like shouting, like slamming doors, like making the other person cry as much as they'd made you cry. I was wrong. Real revenge is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. Sometimes it arrives disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning and a spreadsheet on your computer screen. By then, I was 33. 15 years had passed since I'd stood on that front porch with a trash bag in one hand and my future in the other. My life looked nothing like the one my parents had predicted. According to them, I'd fail within 6 months. I'd come crawling home. I'd apologize. I'd admit they had been right. Instead, I had become a senior acquisitions manager for one of the largest commercial and residential investment firms in the state. It wasn't glamorous. Most people imagined real estate as expensive suits, luxury cars, and million-dollar negotiations. The reality was a lot less exciting. Spreadsheets, property records, financial statements, court filings, tax assessments, hours of reading documents that most people would never look at twice. But I loved it. Every file told a story. Some were stories of bad luck. Some were stories of greed. Some were stories of people who simply made one bad decision after another until there was no road left except foreclosure. Our company specialized in buying distressed properties, renovating them, and either renting or reselling them. My job was to evaluate whether a property made financial sense. Emotion wasn't part of the equation. Numbers were, at least, until that Tuesday. I was halfway through a stack of foreclosure notices when my eyes landed on an address, 218 Maple Street. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It couldn't be. Thousands of houses, thousands of streets. It had to be another Maple Street. I clicked the file. Owner names: Richard Caldwell, Susan Caldwell, my parents. I leaned back in my chair so abruptly my desk chair rolled into the filing cabinet behind me. The metallic bang echoed through the office. A coworker poked his head around the corner. You okay? Yeah. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. I just hit the cabinet. He laughed and disappeared. I stared back at the screen. The foreclosure timeline was brutal. Missed mortgage payments, late fees, tax liens, a home equity loan they'd apparently taken years earlier. The balance had snowballed. The bank had finally had enough. Auction date 37 days away. I felt nothing. Or at least that's what I told myself. But my hands were shaking. I closed the file, opened it again, closed it, opened it again. It felt surreal. For years, I'd imagined driving past that house someday, maybe seeing different curtains, different flowers, different people. I'd accepted that it belonged to my past. Now my past was sitting in a digital folder on my desktop, reduced to unpaid balances and legal notices. That evening, I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence gave my thoughts too much room. Should I tell Professor Brooks? Should I tell Mrs. Donnelly? Should I ignore it completely? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I still had no answers. I unlocked my front door. My front door. It still gave me a strange sense of peace every single time. The house wasn't huge. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, an old maple tree that dropped leaves everywhere every autumn. I'd bought it 5 years earlier. Every mortgage payment felt like another brick in a foundation no one could ever take away from me. I walked through each room without turning on any lights, just thinking. The memories I had spent years burying were suddenly alive again. Dad teaching Jason to throw a baseball while telling me to help Mom in the kitchen. Mom criticizing everything from the way I folded towels to the way I laughed. Jason calling me the spare child. I had forgotten that one. Or maybe I'd chosen to. Funny how trauma stores itself. It waits quietly until something unlocks the right drawer. That night, I barely slept. I kept asking myself the same question. What kind of person did I want to be? Not what they deserved. That part was easy. What kind of woman had 15 years of hardship turned me into? There was a difference. A very important one. I wasn't interested in cruelty. Cruelty had built the people they became. I wasn't going to inherit that. But consequences? Consequences were different. The next morning, I requested the full property file. Officially, it was part of my job. Unofficially, my heartbeat doubled while I waited for the documents. The valuation came back lower than expected. The house had been neglected. Roof damage, foundation concerns, outdated plumbing, years of deferred maintenance. The neighborhood, however, had exploded in value. Developers were buying every property they could find. That meant bidding at auction would be competitive, unless someone moved quickly. At lunch, I called Professor Brooks. She answered on the second ring. Emma? Hi. You sound troubled. She always could hear it. Even after all these years, I told her everything. Every detail. The foreclosure. The auction. The address. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Finally, she asked, "What do you want?" "I don't know." "No." Her voice became firmer. "I didn't ask what you think you should do. I asked what you want." Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not really. I stared out my office window. The words caught in my throat. I want them to know I survived. Another pause. I whispered. I want them to understand that throwing me away didn't destroy me. Professor Brooks spoke softly. Then make sure whatever you do is about proving something to yourself, not punishing them. If revenge becomes your identity, they still control you. Those words stayed with me. A week later, I drove to Maple Street for the first time in almost 16 years. The neighborhood looked smaller. Isn't that strange? Places from childhood always shrink. The sidewalks seemed narrower, the trees shorter, the houses closer together. I parked across the street. The blue shutters were faded. The flower beds were overgrown. The white paint had yellowed. Dad's old pickup sat in the driveway, rust spreading along the wheel wells. The porch sagged slightly. Time had touched everything. I stayed in my car for almost 20 minutes, watching, remembering. Then the front door opened. Mom stepped outside. She looked old. Older than 60 should have looked. Her hair had gone almost completely gray. Her shoulders curved inward. She carried a small watering can toward the dead flower beds. For one brief, dangerous moment, I felt sorry for her. Then I watched her glance toward the neighboring house, Mrs. Donnelly's old house. Someone else lived there now. Mrs. Donnelly had passed away 2 years earlier. I hadn't even known until after the funeral. Work had taken me overseas for a project, and by the time I returned, she was gone. The thought hit me like a punch. The woman who had given me shelter was gone. The woman who had thrown me away still lived in the house she'd protected more fiercely than her own daughter. Life wasn't fair. It never had been. I drove away. Not because I was emotional, because I finally understood something. The house wasn't the source of my pain. The people inside it were. The building itself had done nothing wrong. It had simply witnessed everything. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Our company intended to bid. Normally, I'd prepare the recommendation and someone else would attend. Instead, I requested permission to represent us. My supervisor looked surprised. You? I know the area well. Technically true. He nodded. Fine. I walked back to my office with the authorization letter in my hand. This was becoming real. Very real. 2 days before the auction, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered. Dad. I recognized his breathing before he even spoke. Emma. No greeting. No apology. Nothing. We heard your company might be looking at the property. I said nothing. We were wondering. His voice sounded strained. If you could pull some strings. Pull some strings. Not, please, not, we're sorry. Just another favor. I asked quietly. How did you get my number? Jason. Of course. He'd found me on social media years earlier. We'd never spoken. He simply watched from a distance. Dad continued. We just need more time. I closed my eyes. More time. I had begged for time once. Time to figure things out. Time to stay until college started. Time to be their daughter. They'd given me until noon. Now they wanted what they'd refused me. Time. I can't interfere with a legal process. You won't? His tone sharpened. So that's it? I inhaled slowly. No. That's accountability. He muttered something under his breath, then one sentence. You're just as selfish as you've always been. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, and instead of crying, I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, his opinion no longer had the power to hurt me. It simply confirmed he'd never changed. The auction was 48 hours away, and neither he nor my mother had the slightest idea that when the bidding ended, the name on the deed might not belong to a bank, or an investor, or a stranger. It might belong to the daughter they had thrown out with nothing but a trash bag and $23. I barely slept the night before the auction. Not because I was nervous about the money. Our company had approved a maximum bid that easily covered the property's estimated value. What kept me awake was a question that had followed me for nearly half my life. What would I feel if I won? Would it erase anything? Would 18-year-old Emma finally stop standing on that porch in the back of my mind? Or would it simply prove that success couldn't rewrite history? I made coffee at 5 in the morning and stood in my kitchen, staring out at my own backyard. The maple tree rustled softly in the breeze. A robin landed on the fence. Everything felt ordinary. That was the strange part. The biggest day of my emotional life had arrived, and the world hadn't noticed. The sun still rose. People still drove to work. Someone somewhere was probably arguing over burnt toast. Life rarely announces the moments that divide it into before and after. The courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet conversations. Real estate investors, attorneys, representatives from banks, a few curious neighbors. Foreclosure auctions weren't dramatic, despite what television liked to show. There was no shouting, no oversized gavel slamming every 30 seconds. Just paperwork, numbers, people calculating risk. I signed in, collected my bidder's card, and took a seat near the back. My heartbeat remained surprisingly steady. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to do my job. At least, that's what everyone else believed. The auction moved through property after property. Vacant lots, a duplex, a condemned warehouse. Addresses blurred together as the auctioneer read legal descriptions in a practiced monotone. Then he cleared his throat. Next property. He read the parcel number, the legal description, and finally, 218 Maple Street, my childhood home. For a split second, I wasn't 33 anymore. I was 18 again. Standing outside with a trash bag, listening to the deadbolt lock. I squeezed the edge of my chair until my fingertips turned white. Then I let go. That girl had survived. This woman was here to finish what she had started. Bidding began below market value. One investor raised a card, another countered. Numbers climbed steadily, exactly as I'd expected. When they reached our internal target range, I lifted my bidder card for the first time. The auctioneer nodded. Another bidder responded immediately. Back and forth. Calm, professional, no emotion, just numbers. Eventually, only one other investor remained, a local developer. He hesitated. Raised again. I answered. He looked toward the ceiling, doing mental calculations. The property needed too much work. His profit margin was disappearing. He sighed, lowered his card. The auctioneer looked around the room. Any further bids? Silence. Going once. A pause. Going twice. Another pause. Sold. The gavel tapped the desk. Not loudly, just once. A simple sound. And 15 years of my life quietly shifted into place. Technically, the property belonged to my company, not me personally. That distinction mattered. I had never intended to secretly buy the house for myself. This wasn't about ownership as a trophy. It was about responsibility. My company now controlled what happened next. As acquisitions manager, I was assigned to oversee the transition. The irony wasn't lost on me. 15 years earlier, I hadn't been allowed to stay. Now I was responsible for deciding the timeline under which everyone else had to leave. State law required formal notice. Everything had to be handled properly. No shortcuts, no personal exceptions, no emotional decisions. I insisted on that. If I was going to face my parents again, it would be with professionalism, not anger. The notice gave the occupants 30 days to vacate. Exactly 30 days. Not 29, not 28. 30. Because fairness mattered to me, even if it had never mattered to them. 3 days later, I drove back to Maple Street. This time, I didn't park across the street. I walked directly up the cracked sidewalk. Each step felt strangely familiar. The uneven concrete slab near the mailbox, the loose porch board that still creaked under my left foot. Even after all those years, my body remembered things my mind had forgotten. I stood in front of the blue door. The paint had peeled around the edges. The brass knocker Dad had once polished every spring had turned dull. I knocked. 3 calm taps. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Mom stared at me. For a second, she didn't recognize me. Then her face drained of color. Emma. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was shock. Pure, unmistakable shock. I offered a polite smile. Hello, Mom. She looked over my shoulder as if expecting someone else. What? What are you doing here? Before I could answer, Dad appeared behind her. His expression hardened instantly. You. One word. Heavy with 15 years of resentment neither of us had spoken aloud. I held up the folder in my hand. I'm here regarding the property. Dad frowned. What property? I looked around slowly. This one. Neither of them spoke. I opened the folder, removed the official documents, and handed them to him. He took them with obvious irritation. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I watched the exact moment understanding reached him. His shoulders stiffened. His mouth opened slightly. No. He looked up at me. No. I'm afraid the foreclosure sale has been finalized. His face reddened. You work for these people? I do. Mom grabbed the papers from his hands. She skimmed them frantically. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Then she looked at the company letterhead. Her eyes moved down the page. Finally, they landed on my signature. Emma Caldwell, Senior Acquisitions Manager. She looked back at me, then at the signature again, as if reading it twice might somehow change reality. You, her voice cracked. You're the one handling this? Yes. Dad took one step onto the porch, his jaw clenched. So this is what this is. I waited. You planned this? No. I reviewed a foreclosure file assigned through my office. Liar. His voice rose. You've been waiting for this. For years, that accusation would have broken me. Not anymore. I spent 15 years building a life. I met his eyes. I wasn't building revenge. I was building stability. The words hung in the air between us. Mom's hands trembled as she held the paperwork. Emma. It was the first time she'd spoken my name gently in years. Can't you stop this? I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw fear, exhaustion, regret perhaps, but I also noticed something missing. She still hadn't said the words I'd once needed more than anything. I'm sorry. Not once. Not even now. I can't reverse a completed foreclosure. You have influence. I have responsibilities. Dad laughed bitterly. So you hide behind rules. I almost answered immediately. Instead, I took a slow breath. No. I live by them. There's a difference. Silence settled over the porch. A breeze stirred the dying flowers beside the steps. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary afternoon. And yet everything had changed. Finally, Mom spoke. We have nowhere to go. The sentence hit me harder than I expected, because I had heard something almost identical once before. Only the voices had been reversed. At 18, I had nowhere to go. They had known it. They had closed the door anyway. I kept my voice calm. The notice gives you 30 days. Dad scoffed. That's generous? No. I looked directly at him. It's legal. His face twisted with anger. You think you've won? I considered that. Then I answered honestly. No. I won years ago. His expression faltered. The day I stopped believing I needed your approval. For the first time in my life. My father had no reply. I turned to leave. Behind me, Mom called my name. I stopped but didn't turn around. Emma. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I did miss you. The words floated across the porch. 15 years too late. I closed my eyes. Part of me, the 18-year-old girl who had cried herself to sleep in a dorm room, who had spent holidays alone, who had answered the phone hoping to hear love instead of obligation, wanted to believe her. But another part of me understood something that girl never could. Missing someone isn't the same as choosing them. Love isn't measured by what people feel. It's measured by what they do. I looked back over my shoulder. I'm sure you did. Then I walked away. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to say. Over the next month, I received 3 phone calls from Jason. I didn't answer the first, or the second. On the third, curiosity got the better of me. He skipped any greeting. So, you really own the place now? Our company does. Same difference? He laughed awkwardly. You know, Mom's been crying a lot. I said nothing. You could help. I already did. What? I gave them exactly what they gave me. He frowned audibly. What are you talking about? Time. Silence. Then, very quietly, he asked, You still hate us? I looked around my living room. The framed diploma on the wall. The bookshelf Professor Brooks had helped me build. A photograph of Mrs. Donnelly smiling in her garden, taken the summer before she passed away. Hate? No. Hate requires energy. And I had spent too many years investing mine in a future instead of a past. I don't hate you. You don't? No. Another pause. I just don't belong to you anymore. He didn't know what to say. Neither did I. The call ended a few seconds later. 30 days passed. For the first time in their lives, my parents packed their belongings into cardboard boxes. Neighbors watched quietly from porches. Some remembered the day I had been sent away. Others only knew rumors. People whispered. Not because I had humiliated them, because life had completed a circle no one expected. The daughter who had once left carrying everything she owned in a trash bag had returned, wearing a tailored blazer, carrying legal documents instead. Not with cruelty, not with screaming, with dignity. And somehow, that made it impossible for anyone to paint her as the villain. I visited the property one final time after it was vacant. The rooms were empty. The air smelled of old wood and dust. My footsteps echoed through the hallway. I walked into what had once been my bedroom. The wallpaper was gone, the carpet stained. The loose floorboard where I'd hidden my savings was still there. I knelt, lifted it carefully. The space beneath was empty. Of course it was. I smiled sadly. That hidden compartment had once held every dream I thought I'd ever have. Now, the dreams were standing above it. I no longer needed to hide them. I stayed in that room longer than I expected. Sunlight spilled through the old window, casting long rectangles across the floorboards. The room felt much smaller than it had when I was 18, maybe because fear makes everything seem larger. Larger walls, larger problems, larger monsters. I slowly walked my hand along the windowsill. Dad had built that frame himself. I remembered helping him paint it when I was 9. I'd gotten white paint all over my hands. He'd laughed, actually laughed. For years, I'd clung to moments like that as proof that somewhere underneath everything, there had been love. Now I understood something different. People can have moments of kindness without being consistently kind. One good memory doesn't erase a lifetime of bad ones, and one terrible chapter doesn't have to define the rest of your story. That realization brought me more peace than revenge ever could. The renovation crew started work the following Monday. The project manager asked the usual questions. Keep the kitchen? No. The bathrooms? Completely redo them. The bedrooms? I looked one last time toward the hallway. Everything. Within days, the walls I'd spent years staring at were coming down. The outdated cabinets were removed. The stained carpets disappeared into dumpsters. The cracked porch was demolished. Watching it all happen felt strangely symbolic. Not because I wanted to erase my childhood, because I finally understood that rebuilding something doesn't mean pretending the damage never existed. It means refusing to let the damage be the final version. 3 months later, the house looked completely different. Fresh paint. A new roof. Wide front windows. A stronger porch. A small garden out front filled with flowering shrubs. During the renovation, one of my coworkers asked if I wanted first refusal on buying it myself. He assumed there was sentimental value. I smiled and shook my head. No. Really? Really? You don't want it? I looked at the finished house through the office window. For a moment, I imagined living there, making coffee in the kitchen, sleeping in my old bedroom, watching sunsets from the porch. Then I imagined hearing echoes every morning. The slammed door, the arguments, the silence. Some houses are buildings, others are museums. I had no interest in living inside my own history. No, I said again, I'm looking for homes, not monuments. The company listed the property for sale. A young couple bought it. They had a little girl who couldn't have been older than 4. The first time I drove past after they moved in, she was drawing with sidewalk chalk on the front walkway. Her parents sat together on the porch laughing while she proudly held up a crooked picture she'd made. I pulled over for a moment. Not because I was sad, because I was unexpectedly happy. The house finally sounded the way a family home should, full of laughter instead of fear, full of beginnings instead of endings. It deserved that. Maybe I did too. About a year later, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mom. I stared at the envelope for almost an hour before opening it. The paper inside was only 2 pages long. There were no requests for money, no excuses, no explanations about how difficult things had been. Instead, there was one sentence that stopped me cold. I kept waiting for enough time to pass before apologizing, and one day I realized I had mistaken time for courage. I read it 3 times. Then I kept reading. She admitted they had favored Jason. She admitted taking my savings had been wrong. She admitted that throwing me out had never been about teaching me independence. It had been about control. The apology wasn't perfect. Some parts still sounded like someone struggling to admit the truth. But for the first time in my life, it was an apology. A real one. Not wrapped in conditions. Not followed by but. Just, I'm sorry. I cried. Not because everything was fixed. Some things can't be fixed. Trust isn't a light switch. You don't flip it on after 15 years. But forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I could forgive what happened without inviting it back into my life. So I wrote exactly 1 page in return. I thanked her for apologizing. I told her I genuinely hoped she and Dad found peace. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. Then I ended the letter with the truest sentence I'd ever written. I finally built the life I needed. I hope someday you understand that the daughter you lost wasn't taken away by college or ambition. She was pushed out the front door. I never received another letter. I don't know whether she couldn't answer, or simply didn't have anything left to say. Either way, I was finally okay with unanswered questions. People sometimes ask me whether buying that house was worth it. They're usually disappointed by my answer, because they expect me to describe the satisfaction, the triumph, the victory, and yes, watching my father realize that the girl he dismissed had become the woman holding the paperwork was undeniably satisfying. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But that wasn't the moment that changed me. The moment that changed me happened years earlier, in a tiny dorm room, eating instant noodles, exhausted, alone. When I decided that surviving wasn't enough, that I wanted to build a life no one else could destroy, the foreclosure, the auction, the deed. Those were only the final chapters. The real revenge had already happened. Every early morning, every late night shift, every exam I passed while running on 4 hours of sleep, every paycheck I saved instead of spending, every decision to become kinder than the people who raised me. That's what truly won, not the house. Me. Sometimes I still think about 18-year-old Emma, standing on that porch with 1 backpack, 1 trash bag, $23, convinced her life had ended. If I could stand beside her now, I wouldn't tell her about the auction, or the promotion, or the day she'd sign documents that would leave her father speechless. I'd tell her something much simpler. I'd say, one day you'll stop measuring your worth by the people who never saw it. One day you'll build a home where no one has to earn the right to belong. And one day, when someone asks who saved your life, the answer will be the woman you became. That was the greatest revenge of all. Not taking away the house, refusing to let them take away me. If this story reminded you that success is often the quietest form of revenge, let me know what you would have done in Emma's position. Would you have made the same choice or handled it differently? If you enjoy long, emotional Reddit revenge stories where patience, resilience, and karma eventually win, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Until next time, remember, sometimes the strongest comeback isn't getting even. It's building a life so good that the people who doubted you can never ignore what you've become.